The thing in the sterile containment cell did not scream. Screaming would have been a comfort, a familiar sign of pain or terror. Instead, it hummed. It was a low, dissonant chord that made the fillings in your teeth ache, and the fluid in your inner ear slosh. The creature, a being of crystalline geometry the press had nicknamed a shard, had once been a creature of perfect, silent grace. It had moved with a logic that was both beautiful and unnerving. Now it sat in the corner of its padded room, vibrating. Its once smooth facets, which had shimmered with internal light, were now cracked and dark, like shattered obsidian. Occasionally, a single facet would flare with a chaotic image. A cartoon cat chasing a mouse, the face of a screaming woman, a field of sunflowers, a bloody fist. Then it would go dark again, and the maddening hum would continue. Dr. Aris Thorne watched the monitor, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the console. For 3 days, it had been like this. The shard's vessel had appeared in orbit without warning. A silent obsidian needle against the curve of the Earth. It hadn't hailed them. It hadn't threatened them. It had simply opened a small hatch and ejected 2 things. The first was the humming broken creature now in containment. The second was a small, metallic cube that was currently being studied in another, even more secure lab. The ship had then vanished without a ripple, as if it had never been. "Anything?" General Matson asked, his voice a low rumble of impatience. He stood behind Thorne, smelling of coffee and authority. "The same, General," Thorne said, not taking his eyes off the screen. "The hum is modulating, but the pattern is non-repeating. It's just noise, psychic noise." What did it see, Thorne? What did it encounter that could do this? That was the question that kept every person in this underground bunker awake at night. The shards, as the cube had revealed through a series of complex mathematical proofs, were explorers, archivists of consciousness. They had peacefully catalogued over 6,000 sentient species across the galaxy. They were psychic sponges, absorbing the totality of a being's experience and moving on. They were cosmic tourists with minds like supercomputers. And something had broken one, snapped it like a dry twig. "The cube's data is fragmented," Thorne said, pulling up another screen. "It indicates the subject was a single Terran hominid, male, approximate age 42 standard years. The scan lasted for less than 10 of our minutes." Matson swore under his breath. 10 minutes. 10 minutes of looking inside one man's head, and this thing, this ancient, brilliant thing, is now a gibbering wreck. Who was he, Thorne? The data gave them a location, a rough one, a suburban sprawl in Ohio, but no name, no face, just a psychic echo. "We don't know," Thorne admitted, a cold dread seeping into his bones. "But he's out there, walking around, mowing his lawn, paying his taxes. And he's carrying a weapon inside his skull that can shatter minds older than our species. A weapon he doesn't even know he has." Miles away under a placid blue sky, Arthur Penwright finished grading a stack of history papers. He sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. The theme had been the causes of the Peloponnesian War, and his 10th graders had provided a predictable mix of plagiarized paragraphs and wild misinterpretations. One student, Kevin, had insisted the whole thing was caused by a dispute over a stolen goat. Arthur circled the passage with his red pen and wrote, "See me after class." He took a sip of his lukewarm coffee and looked out the window of his small study. The world was quiet. The sprinklers next door clicked on, casting rainbows in the afternoon sun. He had to remember to pick up milk on the way home from school tomorrow, and cat food. His cat, a fat orange tabby named General Sherman, was a tyrant about his feeding schedule. A perfectly normal thought for a perfectly normal man, in a perfectly normal house on a perfectly normal day. He had no idea he was the most dangerous creature in the universe. He stretched, feeling a pop in his lower back, and then went downstairs to see what was on television. The universe held its breath, and Arthur Penwright wondered if he should order a pizza for dinner. He decided against it. Too much sodium. The change came without a sound. One moment, Arthur was standing in his living room, debating the merits of frozen lasagna. The next, the room was gone. The beige walls, the slightly faded floral sofa, the framed print of Van Gogh's Starry Night above the fireplace, all of it vanished. He was somewhere else. The air was cold and smelled of ozone, like the air after a severe thunderstorm. The floor was a smooth, seamless black material that seemed to drink the light. There was no ceiling, just an infinite starless darkness above. He was standing on a platform in the middle of nowhere. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up his throat, but it was muffled by a profound sense of calm that did not belong to him. It felt like a heavy blanket had been draped over his emotions. He tried to scream, but his mouth wouldn't open. He tried to run, but his legs were rooted to the spot. He could only look. They emerged from the darkness. At first he thought they were sculptures, impossibly complex structures of crystal and light. There were 3 of them. They floated silently towards him, their bodies made of interlocking geometric shapes that shifted and reformed in ways that made his head hurt if he looked too long. They had no faces, no limbs, no discernible front or back. One was larger than the others, its internal light a steady, brilliant white. The other 2 glowed with a softer blue light. A voice entered his mind. It wasn't a voice of words, but of pure meaning, a direct injection of concepts. You are the subject. Do not be alarmed. We intend no harm. Arthur's mind reeled. Aliens, it was the only possible explanation. He was on a spaceship, abducted by aliens. The sheer, ludicrous reality of it was almost funny. He thought of Kevin's essay about the goat. This was somehow more ridiculous. We are the Zelos, the voice continued, emanating from the larger, white-glowing being. We are a nexus of information. We travel the void to observe and to archive. Your species has achieved a Class -4 civilization, notable for its rapid technological advancement and chaotic energy signature. We wish to create a record. A record, Arthur thought, the alien-induced calm holding his terror at bay. A record of what? Of you. We have chosen you as a representative sample. Your neural patterns are unremarkable. Your life experiences fall within the median range for your demographic. You are perfectly average. You are the ideal specimen. Perfectly average. Arthur felt a strange, dull sting. He'd spent his whole life feeling average. A B+ student, a decent but forgettable history teacher, a man who lived a quiet life. To have it confirmed by a cosmic entity was somehow insulting. The process is non-invasive. We will establish a confluence, a shared mental space. We will observe the contents of your consciousness, your memories, your thoughts, your emotions. It will be a passive scan. You will experience a state of light dissociation. The process will be brief. Arthur didn't have a choice, he knew that. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. He was a bug in a jar, a specimen. The calm began to feel less like a blanket and more like a straitjacket. He was a history teacher. He knew what happened when a powerful, advanced civilization encountered a less developed one. It never ended well for the less developed one. "Prepare for the confluence," the central Zelos communicated. The other two moved closer, flanking him. Their blue light intensified, casting strange, sharp shadows that didn't seem to follow any known laws of physics. Arthur Penwright, the average man, closed his eyes. He thought of his wife, Sarah. He thought of her smile. He thought of the smell of her hair. It was a small, desperate act of defiance. If they were going to look inside his head, he would at least choose the first thing they saw. The white light of the central Xylos flared, and a feeling like falling into a warm ocean washed over him. The confluence had begun, and the universe, though it did not know it yet, had just sealed its fate. The first thing the Xylos perceived was not Sarah's smile. It was the song, a relentless, looping fragment of a popular tune from a few years back. Something about a baby shark. It was lodged in Arthur's surface, thoughts like a piece of popcorn between teeth, a maddeningly cheerful and utterly meaningless piece of data. Query: what is the function of this auditory pattern? It repeats without resolution. The primary conductor's thought was a model of detached curiosity. It sifted through the psychic static, trying to find the signal in the noise. Arthur, floating in a placid mental sea, couldn't answer directly. The song was just there. It had been on the radio in the faculty lounge, and now it was stuck. The Zealous catalogued it as involuntary auditory residue and moved on. They encountered the grocery list next. Milk. Cat food, tuna flavor, not salmon. General Sherman was very particular. Bread. A bottle of the cheap red wine Arthur liked. They processed this information with cool efficiency. Nutritional maintenance requirements. Then came the lesson plan for tomorrow. Pericles' funeral oration. Key themes: civic duty, democracy, sacrifice for the state. The Zelos paused, cross-referencing this with their initial scan of Earth's chaotic energy signature. Contradiction detected. O culture that idealizes collective sacrifice, while its individuals exhibit profound self-interest. Intriguing. This was the surface, the trivial, churning froth of a human mind. The Zelos were masters of this. They had scanned the crystalline dream songs of silicon lifeforms on Kepler-186f and the collective historical grief of a hive mind that had lost its homeworld to a supernova. This was simple. This was messy. The thoughts did not flow in a logical sequence. A worry about a leaky faucet in the bathroom was immediately followed by a half-remembered line from a movie, which then bled into a fleeting moment of irritation at his neighbor for leaving his trash cans out a day too long. It was like trying to read a book where every page was from a different library. The primary conductor adjusted its parameters, filtering the chaff to get to the core data. It gently pushed deeper, past the mental flotsam. And then it found Sarah. Not just the image of her smile that Arthur had clung to, but the entire library of her. The smell of cinnamon and coffee on a Sunday morning. The feel of her hand in his. The sound of her laughter, a sound that Arthur's mind had preserved with perfect fidelity. The memory of their first date, awkward and sweet. The day they bought their little house. The memory of painting the living room, getting more blue paint on themselves than on the walls. The Zelos paused. This was different. This was not just data. It was data imbued with a powerful, coherent emotional field. They analyzed the core emotion, a complex waveform they labeled love. It was inefficient. It served no logical purpose for survival beyond basic procreation. Yet it was the most powerful, most organized signal they had yet encountered in this mind. It was a sun in the middle of a psychic junkyard. This emotional state is a core component of the subject's identity. The primary conductor transmitted to its aides. It appears to be a memory of a terminated mate. The data is pleasant. The Zelos allow the memories to wash over them. They saw Arthur and Sarah on their wedding day. Arthur, sweating in his rented tuxedo. Sarah, looking radiant, tripping slightly on her own dress and laughing it off. The Zelos did not understand laughter, but they understood the wave of pure, unadulterated joy that accompanied the image. For a moment, the three alien minds were synchronized in the observation of this simple, profound human happiness. They were archivists. They appreciated well-organized data, and the library of Sarah was the most beautifully organized thing in Arthur Penright's head. They saw the love, the companionship, the shared jokes, the quiet moments. They saw a life built for two. They were so focused on the beauty of the structure, they didn't notice the rot in its foundation. They hadn't yet found the end of the book. They followed the timeline of the memories forward, expecting more of the same pleasant data. They pushed deeper into the library of Sarah, and that is when they found the door at the back. The one marked with a skull and crossbones. The one Arthur never ever opened. The Zelos, in their quest for complete information, pushed it wide open. The door opened into darkness. The warm, pleasant flow of memories ceased, as if a tap had been turned off. The Zelos registered an abrupt shift in the emotional landscape. The powerful, coherent waveform of love was instantly replaced by a chaotic spike of something else, something jagged and cold. Anomaly detected, the primary conductor broadcast, its light flickering slightly, it proceeding with analysis. They moved into the memory. It was not a neat, recalled event like the wedding day. It was a maelstrom of sensory fragments, raw and unprocessed. The smell of rain on hot asphalt. The squeal of tires, a sound that sliced through the psychic calm like a razor. The blinding glare of headlights where they shouldn't be. The heavy, metallic crunch of impact. The Zelos processed the raw data. Zen, vehicular collision. High-velocity subject was the operator of one vehicle. The mate, Sarah, was the passenger. But the data was not the thing itself. The memory was poisoned. It was wrapped in a thick, suffocating blanket of an emotion they had only encountered in theoretical terms: guilt. It was a corrosive, self-devouring energy. It clung to every fragment of the memory, twisting it. Subject's analysis of the event is illogical, one of the blue Zelos transmitted. The collision was caused by the other vehicle failing to observe a traffic signal. Subject holds no legal or logical culpability. Logic is irrelevant here, the primary conductor returned. The subject's perception is the data. Observe. They saw through Arthur's eyes, the world spinning. The horrifying sound of breaking glass like a shower of falling stars. The sudden, violent stop. The silence that followed. A silence more terrifying than any noise. He remembered turning to his right. He remembered seeing Sarah, her head against the passenger window at an unnatural angle. He remembered the trickle of blood from her temple. And then the Zelos found it, buried beneath the shock and the horror, a single fleeting thought that had flashed through Arthur's mind in that split second of silent aftermath. It was not a thought of grief. It was not a thought of fear. It was a whisper, ugly and selfish and deeply, horribly human. Tess, let this be over. It was the thought of a mind in agony, a mind so overwhelmed, It wished for oblivion, for an end to the pain before the pain had even been properly processed. It was a wish for non-existence. But immediately following it, crashing in like a tidal wave, came the full, crushing realization of what had happened. The love for Sarah, the life they had built, all of it came flooding back, and the shame of that one selfish thought became a cancer in his soul. The Zelos reeled. The contradiction was staggering. It was a logical paradox of impossible magnitude. To hold the most powerful positive emotion, love for a being, and in the same cognitive moment, to experience a wish for the cessation of existence, tied directly to that being's termination. To love something so much that its loss made you wish for your own end, and then to feel shame for that wish. Love and death and guilt and shame, all tangled into a single screaming knot of pure paradox. The primary conductor's perfect white light wavered, turning to sickly yellow for a moment before stabilizing. This is inefficient. This is a recursive emotional loop. It serves no purpose. It is self-damaging. The Zelos tried to categorize it. They had no framework for it. It was like a computer trying to divide by zero. Their own consciousness, built on logic and clean, observable truths, could not properly map this terrain. They had encountered grief before, the clean sadness of loss. This was not that. This was grief that had turned inward and begun to eat itself. It was a black hole of emotion. For the first time in millennia of scanning, the Zelos felt a flicker of something they had never experienced themselves. It was the echo of Arthur's own feelings, a bleed-through from the confluence. It was a cold, unsettling feeling. It was fear. They had looked into the abyss of human trauma, and the abyss was starting to look back. Disturbed but resolute, the primary conductor made a decision. This illogical knot of trauma was clearly a psychic aberration, an anomaly specific to this one event. To complete the archive, they needed to move past it, to see the rest of the subject's mind. Surely the rest would be more orderly. It was a fatal miscalculation. They were leaving the site of the earthquake's epicenter, not understanding that the entire landscape was built on the same fault line. They withdrew from the car crash and plunged deeper, aiming for the foundational layers of consciousness, the place where personality and instinct were forged. They bypassed the conscious mind entirely and dove headfirst into the murky, swirling ocean of the subconscious. It was not the orderly library they had left behind. This was a madman's attic, a place of shadows and strange malformed things. Here logic had no purchase at all. Here there were only symbols and fears and half-formed desires. The first thing they encountered was the spider. It wasn't a memory of a real spider. It was the spider, the archetypal fear. It scurried out from a dark corner of Arthur's mind, huge and black and hairy, with too many eyes that glittered with a malevolent alien intelligence. The Zelos, who had catalogued sentient arachnids the size of moons, felt a jolt of primal aversion that was not their own. It was Arthur's irrational terror, amplified by the dream logic of the subconscious, bleeding directly into them. Subject exhibits an unreasoned fear response to a common terrestrial arthropod. One of the blue Zelos noted its own light pulsing with a strange new rhythm. The perceived threat level is disproportionate to the actual organism. It is not the organism, the primary conductor corrected, its own thoughts now tinged with a faint trace of static. It is the idea of the organism. This is a symbolic representation of dread. They tried to move past the spider, but it was everywhere. Its legs were the dark branches of trees outside a childhood window. Its eyes were the glint of something unknown in a dark basement. The fear was not a single file to be catalogued. It was a virus that had infected dozens of other, unrelated memories. They pushed on, deeper into the clutter. They found petty resentments given monstrous forms. His neighbor, Mr. Henderson, who let his dog do its business on Arthur's lawn, appeared as a slobbering, dog-headed giant, trampling his perfectly manicured garden. A student who had once cheated on a history test was seen being judged by a tribunal of grim-faced historical figures, with Abraham Lincoln pointing an accusatory finger. These were not serious thoughts, but the subconscious had rendered them as grand, emotional tableaus. Then they found the lies. Not the big, important lies, but the small, constant, everyday deceptions that grease the wheels of human society. They saw Arthur telling his Aunt Mildred that her fruitcake was delicious, when his mind was screaming the word brick. They saw him nodding politely at a faculty meeting, pretending to agree with a new policy he thought was idiotic. They saw him smiling and saying, "I am fine," to a concerned colleague. A week after Sarah's funeral, a chasm of misery yawning beneath the simple two-word falsehood. To the Zelos, this was insanity. Their entire society was based on the pure, unfiltered transmission of thought. Deception was a concept as alien to them as color is to a blind man. But this was worse. This was self-deception. The subject knew he was lying, yet he projected the lie with total conviction. He built a false reality for social convenience. The primary conductor's light flickered violently now, spasming between white and a muddy, confused gray. Paradox upon paradox. The subject knowingly transmits false data to his peers. He broadcasts a state of fine while experiencing a state of grief. He projects agreement while experiencing dissent. The cognitive dissonance is catastrophic. The Zelos were beings of pure integrity. What they thought was what they were. The idea of a mind being so fundamentally divided against itself, a mind that could think one thing and say another, and believe both in some strange way, was a logical breakage. It was like trying to comprehend a shape that was both a circle and a square at the same instant. They were lost. They were adrift in a sea of irrational fears, petty hatreds, and constant low-level dishonesty. The clean, beautiful data of love they had first encountered seemed a million miles away. They had come to archive a consciousness, but instead they found a civil war. And they were standing right in the middle of the battlefield. The primary conductor tried to regain control. It attempted to impose order on the chaos, to wall off the subconscious and return to the more structured memories. But it was too late. The confluence was a two-way street. They had opened the floodgates of Arthur's mind, and now the flood was pouring into them. The irrationality was contagious. One of the blue-litten aids began to emit a low, warbling hum, its geometric form shuddering. It was broadcasting a fragmented loop. The spider is in the fruitcake. The spider is in the fruitcake. It's true. The other aid simply went dark, its light extinguished, as if it had mentally unplugged itself from the terrifying input. Main cohesion. Hoss, the primary conductor, commanded, but its own thought was frayed at the edges. The calm, authoritative tone was gone, replaced by something brittle, something close to panic. It tried to pull back to sever the connection, but it was entangled. The messiness of Arthur's mind had sunk its hooks into the Zelos' pristine consciousness. It was then that they were hit by the wave. It wasn't one thing, it was everything, all at once. The Zelos experienced, in a single timeless moment, the entirety of Arthur Penright's being. Not in sequence, not in any logical order, but as a simultaneous crushing onslaught. They felt the profound, aching grief for his dead wife, a love so deep it felt like a missing limb. At the exact same instant, they heard the relentlessly cheerful, idiotic Baby Shark song. Doo-doo, doo-doo-doo-doo. They felt the crushing anxiety about his mortgage payment, a cold knot of numbers and fear. Simultaneously, they experienced the vicarious thrill of a car chase from a mindless action movie Arthur had watched last week. They felt the shame of that one horrible thought, in the moment after the crash, the wish for it all to be over. At the same time, they were subjected to the plot summary of the Peloponnesian War, complete with Kevin's theory about the goat. They felt the existential dread that sometimes kept Arthur up at night, the dizzying fear of a cold, empty universe without God or purpose. And right alongside it, the simple, profound pleasure of the first sip of coffee in the morning. The primal, irrational fear of the spider. The mundane irritation of a leaky faucet. Drip, drip, drip. The memory of his mother's kindness. A sudden, intrusive, violent thought about pushing a stranger onto subway tracks, a thought that horrified Arthur himself and was instantly suppressed. The feeling of pride at a student's well-written essay. The quiet, desperate loneliness of eating dinner alone in front of the television. Grief, joy, fear, love, hate, boredom, lust, trivia, philosophy, hope, despair. Tuna-flavored cat food, the meaning of life. A catchy commercial jingle. The face of his lost love. It was the grand and the mundane, the sacred and the profane, the beautiful and the ugly, all blended together into a single deafening psychic scream. It was the sound of a soul. For the Zelos, beings of singular purpose and linear thought, this was the ultimate horror. Their minds were designed to process one concept at a time, perfectly and completely. To be hit with tens of thousands of contradictory concepts at once was not something they could process. It was like pouring the entire Pacific Ocean through a garden hose. The primary conductor's form began to fracture. The clean lines of its crystalline body blurred. Facets of light broke off and dissolved into the darkness like smoke. It was trying to process everything, and it was breaking under the strain. It was trying to find the logic in the illogical, the pattern in the chaos. But there was no pattern. The chaos was the pattern. It weeps for what it kills, the conductor broadcast. Its thought now, a shattered mosaic of Arthur's own feelings. It builds gods, and then fears their silence. It loves with a violence that is indistinguishable from grief. The logic is pain. The equation is madness. It sings while it burns. The confluence had become a vortex, dragging the Zelos down into the glorious, terrifying, contradictory mess of being human. They had come seeking knowledge. What they found was a monster that didn't know it was a monster. That didn't know it was a monster. A monster that was capable of writing poetry and committing genocide. A monster that worried about its cat, the final cohesive thought of the primary conductor, before it shattered completely, was one of pure, unadulterated terror. This is not a consciousness. This is a plague. The severance was not gentle. It was a violent psychic amputation. One moment, Arthur Penright was adrift in a sea of his own life. The next, he was slammed back into himself with the force of a physical blow. The alien-induced calm vanished, and the raw, undiluted terror he should have felt from the beginning hit him all at once. He gasped, his lungs burning, and fell to his knees on the cold, black floor. The sound that filled the chamber was the sound he had heard in the containment cell on Dr. Thorne's monitor, though Arthur wouldn't know that. It was the hum, a discordant, multi-layered drone of madness. It was coming from the primary conductor. The great crystalline being was no longer floating in graceful silence. It was shuddering violently, its entire structure seeming to liquefy and reform in random, nauseating patterns. Its brilliant white light was gone, replaced by a flickering, strobe-like effect that pulsed with sick colors. Bruise purple, fever yellow, blood red. Images, Arthur's images, flashed across its facets like a broken television. The spider. Sarah's face, weeping, the cover of a history textbook. A cartoon shark. The two blue aides, or what was left of them, scrambled back in terror. One was still dark, inert. The other was emitting the broken, looping thought about the spider and the fruitcake, a sound of pure psychic damage. The primary conductor's voice, the one that had been so calm and superior in his mind, was now a fractured scream inside his head, a torrent of broken concepts. Lov heikot, gryferfget, maig etumilla, et spidity hark forgiksins es murder, sunfleggers tarks miders. It was the sound of a computer trying to recite the entire internet at once. It was the sound of a mind that had been utterly irrevocably broken. The Zelos had looked into the human condition, and the human condition had shattered them. They were beings of order. They had encountered the sublime, beautiful, terrifying chaos that was a human being, and it had driven them insane. Suddenly the humming stopped. The primary conductor froze, its chaotic light settling on a single, dim, ugly shade of brown. A new thought emanated from it, no longer directed at Arthur, but broadcast outwards, a desperate warning flare. Contagion. Mental plague. The chaos is a vector, the paradox is a weapon. Quarantine, purge, flee. Then, with a final convulsive shudder, the primary conductor seemed to collapse inward. Its light didn't just go out. It was devoured from within, leaving a dead silent husk of blackened crystal hanging in the air. It looked like a piece of burnt-out charcoal. The remaining sane Xylos, the one that had gone dark, flared back to a dim blue light. It radiated a wave of pure, undiluted panic. It darted towards the dead conductor, then recoiled as if from a source of immense radiation. It turned its attention to the other aide, still muttering about spiders, and with a pulse of sharp, focused energy, simply deactivated it. The babbling stopped. The blue light faded. Now there was only one. It turned its attention to Arthur, who was still huddled on the floor, shaking. He was the source. He was the disease. The Xylos's thought, when it came, was no longer curious or superior. It was terrified. Get it out. The black floor beneath Arthur dissolved. He was falling. Not through a void, but through a tunnel of swirling, indistinct colors. The cold air of the ship was replaced by the familiar, slightly musty smell of his own house. The transition was instantaneous and brutally disorienting. He landed not on the floor, but in the middle of his own bed, the impact knocking the wind out of him. He was tangled in his comforter. The room was dark, the only light coming from the digital clock on his nightstand. It read 3:14 a.m. He lay there, gasping for breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. It was a dream. It had to be a dream. A nightmare brought on by too much lasagna, and a pile of badly written history papers. A vivid, terrifying, utterly convincing dream. He sat up, his hands shaking. The house was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. General Sherman was a furry lump at the foot of the bed. Everything was normal. He was safe. He reached over to turn on his bedside lamp, his fingers fumbling for the switch. His hand brushed against something small and cool on the nightstand. Something that shouldn't be there. It wasn't his wallet, or his glass of water, or the book he'd been reading. He found the lamp switch and clicked it on. The room was flooded with soft yellow light. Arthur looked down at his nightstand. Sitting next to his alarm clock was a small black object. It was a perfect cube, about an inch across, made of a material that seemed to absorb the light, a material that felt utterly alien to the touch. It was the cube Dr. Thorne was studying in a bunker 1,000 miles away. The Zelos, in their panicked haste to eject the contagion, had been clumsy. They had left a souvenir. The dream was not a dream, and Arthur Penwright was no longer just an average man. He was a survivor. He was a weapon, and he was a witness. The weeks that followed were strange. Arthur tried to force the memory of the cold black ship and the crystalline beings into the box labeled Nightmare. He put the small black cube in a sock drawer, buried beneath old ties and mismatched socks, a secret he couldn't bear to look at, but couldn't bring himself to throw away. He went back to teaching. He graded papers on the French Revolution. He reminded Kevin that Napoleon was not, in fact, famously short because he was sad about his goat. He went through the motions of his life. But something had changed. The internal noise was quieter. The constant, low-level anxiety about the mortgage, the leaky faucet, the state of the world. It was still there, but it was muffled, as if someone had turned down the volume. The grief for Sarah was no longer a jagged, open wound. It was a scar, a part of him, but it didn't ache with the same soul-crushing intensity. It was as if the Zealous, in their frantic, terrified scan, had inadvertently forced him to confront everything he kept buried. They had rummaged through the attic of his soul, and in doing so had tidied up a little. It was the most terrifying and effective therapy session in human history. He found himself smiling more. He started jogging in the mornings. He fixed the leaky faucet. He even tried a new brand of cat food for General Sherman. The general was not pleased, but Arthur stood his ground. He was still Arthur Penwright, but he was a version of himself with the edges sanded down. The inner chaos brought to a low simmer instead of a frantic boil. He felt peaceful. He had no idea that while he was discovering a newfound sense of calm, the rest of the world was beginning to panic. In the bunker, Dr. Thorne and his team finally managed to decode a section of the cube the aliens had ejected. It wasn't a message. It was a log file, a ship's black box. It was fragmented, corrupted by the psychic feedback of the conductor's breakdown, but there were pieces. "My God," Thorne whispered, staring at the translated text on the screen. General Madsen leaned over his shoulder, his face grim. The text was a jumble of Zelos technical jargon and pure, raw emotion. Confluence initiated. Subject: hominid, median specimen. Surface thoughts exhibit high-level chaotic noise. Auditory residue pattern baby shark logged, proceeding to core memory. Emotional structure love analyzed. Coherent, powerful. Anomaly of beauty in the chaos. Taruma detected. Paradox lovedith. Guftefelv. Wondan, wonganding logic fair imminent. Subconscious is a nexus of irrationality. Symbolic spheres, constant low-vibratory deception. The mind is at war with the self. The final legible entry was the most chilling. It was from the primary conductor, logged nanoseconds before its final breakdown. They live in it. They are born in it. The storm of contradiction. They can love and hate the same object simultaneously. They can believe lies they themselves have created. They build civilizations on foundations of irrational hope and shared delusion. We are beings of singular truth. This consciousness is a multiverse of conflicting truths. To observe it is to be shattered by it. It is not a mind. It is a reality engine that runs on paradox. Stay away. Madsen stepped back from the console, his face pale. A reality engine that runs on paradox, he repeated slowly. Thorn, what in God's name does that mean? I think it means, Thorn said, his voice trembling slightly, that the very thing that makes us human, our ability to hold contradictory ideas in our heads, to love and to mourn, to hope against all evidence, to tell ourselves stories, to lie to get through the day, is a weapon from their perspective. Our messy, irrational, emotional minds are a form of psychic radiation to a species built on pure logic. We poison to them. The general was silent for a long moment. He looked at the screen showing the broken, humming shard in its cell. It was still vibrating, a monument to the power of a single average human mind. So this man, this teacher from Ohio, Madsen said, he didn't do anything to them. He just was. Exactly, General, Thorn replied. He just was, and that was enough to drive them insane. The implications began to settle over the room, heavy and cold. Humanity wasn't just another species in the galaxy. It was an anomaly, a cosmic danger, a mental plague in a quiet corner of the Milky Way. And the Xylos, a species of galactic explorers, now knew it. They had fled, and they were undoubtedly going to tell others. Far out in the cold, silent darkness of the Oort cloud, the Xylos ship reappeared. It was no longer the sleek, perfect obsidian needle it had been. It was damaged. Not physically, but psychically. The ship itself was an extension of the Xylos consciousness, and the consciousness of its crew was in ruins. The single remaining sane Xylos, the one who had ejected Arthur, was now the acting conductor. Its blue light was dim, flickering with exhaustion and terror. The ship's internal systems were in chaos. Navigation was erratic. The archive, their sacred collection of 6,000 catalogued consciousnesses, was corrupted, infected with fragments of Arthur's mind. The dream songs of the silicon lifeforms now had a faint, maddening backbeat of Baby Shark. The historical grief of the hive mind was now tinged with an irrational fear of spiders. The new conductor's first act was one of desperation. It purged the archive. It erased millennia of work, the memories of thousands of species, casting it all into the void to eliminate the contagion. The loss was profound. A galactic library burned to the ground, but the fear was greater than the grief. Its second act was to craft a warning. It needed to be simple. It needed to be universal. It needed to convey a horror that defied their own language of pure logic. The experience had taught it a new vocabulary, the vocabulary of human dread. It accessed the ship's deep space broadcast system. It didn't send a message of complex mathematics or elegant proofs. It sent a feeling. It broadcast the pure, raw terror it had felt in that chamber. It broadcast the illogical, soul-shredding image of the spider. It broadcast the sound of breaking glass and the feeling of corrosive guilt. And it attached a simple repeating message. translated into 1,000 different modes of communication, from radio waves to gravitational pulses, a quarantine beacon. The message was this: Warning, do not approach System Sol. Avoid Sector 7. Consciousness. Pasplage indigenous. Lifeform is a paradoxical horror. Fate hides its violence behind love. It builds beauty from madness. Its very nature is a weapon that shatters truth. Stay away. There is a monster there. It smiles and it weeps for what it kills. Stay away from the madness of Earth. The ship then turned its nose away from the Sol system and fled. It didn't just warp away. It tore a hole in space-time, a desperate, clumsy rip, and plunged through, aiming for the farthest, darkest corner of the galaxy it could find. It was running for its life from a memory. Back on Earth, Arthur Penwright was having a good day. He had finally gotten Kevin to understand the complex economic rivalries between Athens and Sparta. He had bought the correct tuna-flavored cat food, earning a rare purr of approval from General Sherman. He was sitting on his back porch, drinking a glass of iced tea, watching the sunset. The sky was a beautiful, peaceful canvas of orange and purple. He felt a strange sense of connection to the world, a feeling he hadn't had since Sarah was alive. The quiet hum of his own mind felt less like a prison and more like a home. He didn't know that his quiet, messy, beautiful, contradictory mind had just redrawn the map of the galaxy. He didn't know that his planet was now sitting in the middle of a vast, self-imposed quarantine zone. He didn't know that races of unimaginable age and power were receiving a message of terror and giving his small blue world a very, very wide berth. He took another sip of his iced tea. A mosquito buzzed near his ear. He swatted it. A small, casual act of violence. He felt a brief, fleeting pang of guilt for killing a living thing. Then he forgot about it and thought about what he would have for dinner. The monster smiled and watched the sunset entirely at peace. 6 months later, the world was different, though most of its inhabitants didn't know why. There was a new tension in the halls of power. International space programs were quietly and inexplicably defunded. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, once a celebrated scientific endeavor, was now spoken of in hushed, fearful tones in classified briefings. The official story was budget cuts and shifting priorities. The truth was colder. Dr. Aris Thorne stood before a massive screen in the bunker. The screen showed a map of the local galactic cluster. At its center was a single tiny blue dot labeled Sol. Surrounding it was a vast red-shaded sphere, a no-go zone, established not by humans, but for them. Every probe they sent past the orbit of Pluto went silent. Every deep space transmission they broadcast was met with an impenetrable wall of jamming. But they could still listen, and what they heard was the echo of the Zilos's warning, repeated and amplified by other unknown races. The galaxy was shunning them. They were cosmic lepers. "They've built a fence," General Madsen said, his voice heavy. "And we're the rabid dogs inside it." "Or maybe," Thorne countered, "we're the lions." And they finally realized it's not a good idea to just wander into the cage. He gestured to another screen which showed a live feed of the broken shard. It still hummed its dissonant tune, a constant reminder of their newfound status. They had tried to communicate with it, to offer it logical proofs, mathematical comforts. But its shattered mind could no longer process logic. The only thing that seemed to quiet it, even for a moment, was when they played it recordings of human emotion. the sound of a baby's laughter, the strains of a sad symphony, the angry shouts of a crowd. It seemed to calm the creature, as if it were a junkie getting a small, diluted fix of the drug that had destroyed it. In Ohio, spring had arrived. Arthur Penwright was planting petunias in his front garden. His newfound peace had settled into a quiet contentment. The black cube was still in his sock drawer, a strange, secret paperweight. He sometimes wondered about the dream, but it felt distant now, like a movie he'd once seen. His neighbor, Mr. Henderson, waved from across the street. "Looking good, Art," he shouted. "Thanks, Dave," Arthur called back, smiling. He genuinely liked Dave, even though his dog was still a menace to his lawn. He could hold both thoughts in his head now without any conflict. It was easy. It was just life. He patted the soil around a new flower, his hands covered in dirt. He thought about Sarah. He missed her. The thought was a gentle ache, not a gaping wound. He thought about the petunias and how bright they would look when they bloomed. He thought about the upcoming final exams and the inevitable slew of terrible essays he would have to grade. He felt a pang of annoyance, then a wave of affection for his flawed, trying students. He was a universe in miniature, a swirling galaxy of love, memory, annoyance, and hope. He was a living, breathing paradox. He was everything the Xylus feared. As he worked, a thought, unbidden and strange, floated through his mind. It smiles and it weeps for what it kills. Arthur paused, his trowel hovering over the soil. He looked at his hands, at the dirt under his fingernails. He looked at his quiet house, on his quiet street, in his quiet town. He looked up at the vast blue, indifferent sky. For a split second, he felt a dizzying sense of scale, a feeling of being something immense and terrifying, and utterly unaware of his own nature. Then it passed. A bird chirped on a telephone wire. General Sherman appeared in the window, demanding to be let out. The moment was gone, buried under the gentle, relentless tide of the mundane. Arthur Penwright smiled, stood up to let his cat out, and went back to his gardening. The monster was happy, and the rest of the universe, huddled in the dark, prayed it would never, ever look up.